Hello there. My name is Chantal Cross. I'm from Crosscheck Consultancy Limited, and we specialise in anti-harassment work, specifically prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace. And this particular session is focused on schools, but we do support lots of different industries. But schools is my background. I've worked with schools for over 20 years plus VAT. And so I thought I would do a session specifically for them. So schools are operating under really extraordinary levels of pressure. Nothing new there, I hear you cry, but inspections are getting really culture focused now, and leaders are expected to evidence not just policies but lived values around behaviours. And if that wasn't all enough, since October 2024, schools have had a new legal duty under the Worker Protection Act, Amendment of the Equality Act, to undertake a proactive duty to prevent sexual harassment. And if that wasn't enough, you've got a new Ofsted framework, and I think the ISI framework for independent schools, I think that has changed not that long ago. So lots have changed pretty much. So when schools do get staff safeguarding and harassment prevention right, it directly strengthens evidence for leadership, culture, safeguarding and staff wellbeing. So today, what I want to show you is what actually needs to change and how schools can meet those expectations without adding unnecessary workload, and how meeting your duty to prevent sexual harassment is not an add-on, but it actually can go some way towards meeting your Ofsted and ISI requirements. I will also be sharing all the way through how I help organisations save time with this process and protect employees and the communities that they serve. And you'll also have an opportunity to go on a wait list for a one-stop solution to support you with this duty, just to find out more. So most of you are here because you're absolutely committed to giving your students the best possible education within often very small, close-knit school communities with really strong relationships. Now, I know that you're used to a safeguarding culture where reporting is obvious. So from that side of things, I do think that schools do have a bit of an advantage, but sometimes that could lead to complacency, possibly. Now, I've made a few assumptions here, but I am really open to feedback about what actually goes on in your experience. So if you could, in the chat, could you put a number down with any of these points that actually you resonate with? I know today we don't have any people specifically from schools. We have some very enthusiastic and helpful people that have volunteered to view this for me. So I will move on. Now, obviously, I don't know if this actually happens. I do know that schools have an issue about availability for people to get to training, because obviously you're client facing, as it were, you're student facing. So it's natural that one of the easier ways to deliver training is via recorded training. But this doesn't always mean that the training is going in, and there is case law that indicates that you haven't that training needs to be sort of up to date and not stale, and also they need to be capable of changing that culture, so it isn't just a spot of training and a policy and that's it, you've done. I have actually, number two, I have actually heard that there are no reports of sexual harassment, so actually we don't have a problem, which is completely incorrect. What it does tell you is that no one's reporting harassment, not that it doesn't exist. And I'll go on to explaining the evidence that I've uncovered in terms of the prevalence of sexual harassment in organisations and specifically schools. And I get it. The pressures on schools are absolutely unbelievable at the moment. And with this new Ofsted ICI and ISI framework, I can totally understand that you need to focus on that learning. That's a really high priority. But with these Ofsted with these Ofsted regulations, you do also need to really think more about culturally how that is impacting. Do you respond appropriately when something happens? Brilliant, but what are you actually actively doing to prevent it happening in the first place? For many schools, the gap isn't correct commitment or values. The gap is evidence of prevention, and whether it's actually working. Do colleagues feel confident to speak up early? In my experience in working with schools, it was one thing giving the safeguarding training, but it was something completely different about when it actually came to stepping up and speaking out early. I mean, would staff really know how to intervene if something felt uncomfortable? These are the kind of things that inspectors are looking to explore a bit more. And when they're done well, they evidence across safeguarding, leadership, culture, and staff well-being, all of which are areas that Ofsted look at. So the real question for schools isn't, do we really care about this? It's, have we built the systems and the confidence that demonstrates prevention? So let's have a look at these one by one and look at where the gap is, because the gap is what's stopping schools achieving the outcome they actually want. The confidence, clarity, and defensible prevention, and knowing that it actually works. So, I mean, moving on, I know that schools take safeguarding seriously, but these systems obviously weren't built to look at colleague safeguarding. It was never designed to manage adult workplace power dynamics and staff-to-staff conduct. And there's an additional duty from October this year for third-party harassment. So it really does need more attention, and I'll go into more detail about cases that perhaps really demonstrate how wide this duty is. About 50% of my clients come to me after something has happened, which is a bit of a worry, because obviously how you respond to any complaints is really important, and you will be scrutinised on that. But the duty really is, from October, it will be all reasonable steps to prevent. So that proactive element is really key. So what happens as a result? The below activities may be quite familiar with what you might need to do. What I do see repeatedly are very well-intentioned actions that feel productive and are definitely part of what needs to be done, but they don't always reduce risk or satisfy inspection scrutiny. Please do feel free to disagree with me or tell me what you see happening. So the first one, obviously you need up-to-date policies. And certainly when I was working with schools, we used to do an annual HR audit on schools, all of our schools that bought into our services, to make sure that they had up-to-date policies. But the thing is with policies is that they don't necessarily change behaviour unless people understand them, trust them, they've been well communicated, and there is strong leadership backup in terms of believing in the policies and executing them as well. The kind of recorded training as well, I get that in terms of availability of staff, it's difficult. But if someone's doing an online half an hour training in between 2 Zoom meetings or in between lessons, I'm not sure that that's going to cut it in terms of the new duty. Does it actually change what is happening in very real situations? A couple of other things to note about training is that, as I said earlier on, it needs to be current, it needs to be regular, it needs to be fit for purpose and cover some specific key points. My training does. And the defence for any challenge in terms of this prevention duty is that you took reasonable steps. From October, it's going to be all reasonable steps. I'll go into more detail a bit later. The other thing is that people are very overworked, particularly I used to deal quite often with bursars or school business managers in schools who have an incredibly wide remit, usually with HR, health and safety, facilities and finance, and this creates overload and risk. So I think some thought is really required as to who will lead on this, but also recognition that it's everyone's responsibility, not just HR or the COO or the head teacher. Many schools assume as well that I think that safeguarding processes do exist, and that sexual harassment is covered, or maybe it's covered in induction or somewhere it's covered, so they're fine, but it isn't going to be enough with this new duty. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." So strategy defines what you want to achieve, but culture determines how people actually behave when no one is watching. So that is how is what decides success or failure. And as I mentioned before, 50% of my clients come when there's an issue, and I would strongly recommend that you don't wait until you need me. So what I do want to try and point out as well is what sexual harassment is incredibly common in schools. There was a Unison survey in March 2024 of more than 2,000 school staff across the UK, and they found these horrifying results. And as you can see, the underreporting is huge, 42%, and that's reflected in lots of different studies, including the Gender Equality survey that actually found a much higher rate of over 70% of underreporting. 7% of all school staff report having been sexually harassed at work, and this rises to 10% among female staff in secondary schools. There were other really shocking statistics, like 47% of staff were unsure whether their staff had a sexual harassment policy. 4% said their schools didn't have one. 24% have witnessed. Yes?
Can I just ask, can we interrupt and ask you questions?
Yes, of course. Of course.
At any point, because you've given a lot of information and there were things that I've been writing down, but
yes, of course.
We're moving on
Please
from
do.
next things. You say about 10% of female support staff in secondary school report being harassed. Are there examples of that? Is it from children or is it from other adults?
No, this could be from students, but also by colleagues.
And is there a pattern? Is there certain things that they get harassed on?
I think let me have a look with these notes, but 1 in 7 apparently had witnessed sexual harassment. I mean, I think it's from the pupils and from colleagues. So there were examples like boys trying to slap or touch female staff members' bums. Primary school boys in year 5 using explicit and sexual language to embarrass female staff. There was a head teacher making inappropriate comments like, "I'll watch you do that, it's better than work. Stand here and look pretty, I'll do the talking." Headmaster text.
People didn't report that, because that amazes me that 42% didn't report, because those are quite extreme cases, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't have gone into the detail of each specific case, and it's hard to know as well with underreporting. But this is what these anonymous type surveys really garner, is what the culture is actually like, and removing those barriers is so important.
I think that's the crux of it, isn't it? It's about what that culture is, and whether what's not acceptable, and what's been tradition sometimes, and what is unconscious bias sometimes. Do you know what I mean? It's just accepted sometimes.
Yeah, but also if that kind of quote is coming from leadership, that kind of sets the tone of the whole school. As I know that you know yourself, having worked in schools in leadership roles. Tim, what did you have a question or something you wanted to say? I can't hear you. Do you want to put your mic on?
Yeah, comment actually, if you don't mind, Chantal. Julia, those underreporting figures are consistent. I've just been looking at the NHS staff survey for last year, and I know they don't deal with pupils, but over half of people in the NHS who see bullying and harassment don't raise it. And it's consistent with, we've got a lot of stats across people like legal firms, the NHS, that 50% underreporting is fairly typical of most sectors.
Right, okay.
Sorry to interrupt, Chantal.
Tim is actually one of my partners. He works with, are you the managing director? I never know.
Yeah, I am, yeah. Well, chief exec.
I didn't even know that. You're the managing director of Work in Confidence, which is an anonymous reporting platform who I partner with.
Right, okay.
So he kind of lives this stuff.
Yeah.
So yes, some really shocking quotes, and I'm glad you asked me that question, because I forgot that I'd put in all of these quotes to reference. Any other questions so far?
No, that's okay.
Good. Okay. So this is some other information that I came across, which was the Ofsted rapid review. So they went in and looked at 32 schools in 2021 and found that sexual harassment had been normalised. Now, obviously, a lot of the main focus of this was actually to ask students what harassment was like, not the staff. And they told that sexual harassment and online sexual abuse, such as being sent unsolicited explicit sexual material and being pressured to send nude photos, were much more prevalent than adults realised. So nearly 90% of girls, nearly 50% of boys said being sent explicit pictures or videos they didn't really want to see what was happening happened a lot, or sometimes to their peers. And that sexual harassment occurs so frequently that it has become commonplace. And in the light of this, Ofsted did recommend that leaders should take a whole school, college approach to developing a culture where all kinds of sexual harassment and online sexual abuse are recognised and addressed. And to achieve this, schools and colleges need to create an environment where staff model respectful and appropriate behaviour, and where children and young people are clear about what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. Now, obviously, they're not going to be able to do that unless staff know very clearly what is acceptable, what is unacceptable. Sometimes these behaviours are very subtle. My training covers things like microaggressions as well, so how to recognise that that more subtle stuff, but also what to do in terms of being an active bystander. The review did conclude that schools should assume sexual harassment is happening even where there are no reports, and recommend this whole school approach. Similarly, KICSI, Keeping Children Safe in Education, you'll be aware, has been strengthened, and inspection frameworks have placed greater emphasis on a safeguarding culture and how schools address sexual harassment and peer-on-peer abuse. Schools are also expected to demonstrate these preventative measures, staff awareness, and effective reporting processes rather than simply responding to incidents. So moving on, oops, skip too far ahead. So what's changed? I'll skip through this because you're probably aware the Worker Protection Act was introduced in October 2024. Employers must take reasonable steps to prevent. But what you might not be aware of is that this duty is changing to all reasonable steps in October, as well as colleagues will have a standalone right to bring concerns to a tribunal for third-party harassment. Now, this is huge for schools because a third party is anybody who a colleague comes into contact with during the course of their employment, so that, and who is not an employee. So that could be governors, suppliers, students, cleaners, contractors, trainers. So now more than ever, it is really important to put these preventative measures in place. And quite apart from the evidence I've just told you, you only literally have to switch on the news for the latest BBC, expose. There was one on female surgeons being sexually harassed in theatre. Harrods, the Met Police are institutionally racist and misogynistic. Following the murder of Sarah Everard, there was a recent Panorama programme that indicated that things hadn't really changed. They'd just gone underground, and police officers were more careful about who they were misogynistic to. Bake Off, the list goes on, and more than 1 in 5 people employed worldwide have experienced one or more forms of violence or harassment at work in their lives. Now, obviously, the main reason we need to do this is it's the right thing to do. It's also really good for business. If I think it was a Gallup survey indicated that you'll get 22% higher productivity if there are higher levels of engagement. To get higher levels of engagement, you need that psychological safety, you need that trust, you need that to feel valued, and you can't do that in toxic environments. Obviously, it's the law, and as I've mentioned repeatedly, it's getting tougher from October. So what do they actually look for? Our framework, which includes training and cultural tools to scaffold this for staff, strengthens organisational culture, compliance and safeguarding in ways that directly align with this Ofsted new inspection toolkit. So this work becomes a direct lever for schools to demonstrate compliance, strengthen that culture and reduce risk. So Ofsted inspectors are looking for an awful lot within the new framework, but they are really looking to evidence real behaviour change and what happens day to day. Schools that can explain how they identify risk, listen to staff and act proportionately are much more confident in inspection conversations. So this duty doesn't create inspection pressure, it reduces it. It gives you that language, the evidence, the confidence to show that your culture is intentional, not accidental. So Ofsted looks for, under safeguarding, it requires leaders to ensure that they know, understand and uphold their safeguarding responsibilities, and that concerns can be raised in a culture where people can feel comfortable and confident that appropriate action will be training. My training strengthens this by building that staff confidence to recognise, challenge and report sexual harassment within a proactive safeguarding culture. So it's not just about the pupils, it's about whether the adults working in the organisation are protected from harm and know how to raise concerns safely, to know how to challenge inappropriate behaviour safely as well, and to recognise that more subtle stuff. It's also the new Ofsted toolkit in particular also highlights leaders' responsibility to understand the range of barriers to well-being, and our approach helps schools to identify and reduce those risks for groups disproportionately affected by harassment, and support a more inclusive, psychologically safe workplace. And it improves psychological safety and reduces that underreporting, which is incredibly prevalent. So where adult culture is unclear or inconsistent, pupils do notice, and obviously that staff modelling the appropriate, role modelling the appropriate behaviour is absolutely crucial. And where this is concerns are taken seriously, handled fairly, inclusion improves. So within the workplace culture and behaviour and professional conduct, it also supports those organisations to create that respectful working place where harassment is not normalised or tolerated. Ofsted states as well that harassment, including sexual harassment, must be dealt with quickly, consistently and effectively. And our training equips staff to intervene early, address inappropriate behaviour and maintain a respectful, safe working environment. Ofsted also expects leaders to show strategic oversight, reflective practice and continued improvement, and to be receptive to challenge and reflective about their own practices. And our framework gives leaders and governors the structures, the policies, the systems, the evidence they need to demonstrate that oversight and compliance. And it strengthens that leadership credibility and reinforces behaviour expectations and creates the conditions where inclusion can actually thrive. And obviously there is the training element as well. And Ofsted does expect high quality evidence-informed training that improves safeguarding practice. Within the toolkit, it says that staff must be trained well and empowered to speak out and take action. So what might be happening now, I don't know, is that schools generally, in my experience, seem to be fairly up on having up-to-date policies because they're in such a highly regulated industry. But it might be that training is delivered just once. It may not be tailored to the organisation, and you might not be capturing where the gaps in learning might be occurring, which again is part of the Equality and Human Rights Commission technical guidance. My training does cover that. Issues obviously arise and are reported. The organisation reacts, has to investigate, and then needs to look for someone impartial with the right expertise. And actions are taken as a result of that, which puts the organisation under pressure and perhaps are not preventative. What could be happening as well, which I've found, are that that is prioritised only after there's an issue. Perhaps the policies are not being properly understood. Maybe they're not being communicated. The one-off training as well, safeguarding training, for example, or the inset days only happen once a year as well. What happens after that? Does everyone, really trust the reporting routes? Not all schools have an anonymous platform. Do they cover third parties as well? How is all of this risk managed as well? How are you tracking this? Is the responsibility put onto one person's shoulders, or how is it shared? Perhaps people don't understand how to use the training as well. It's not about blame, it's about system design, and systems only work when they're constantly used, understood, embedded and updated regularly. So how do we prevent sexual... Any questions so far? Sorry, I know I've thrown a lot at you. No questions, everyone's quiet. Okay, so how do we prevent sexual harassment? So the Equality and Human Rights Commission have this technical guidance, which is 83 pages long, but it is fairly plain language, so it's quite useful. And they recommend that you start off with a risk-based assessment, that you're unlikely to be able to prove that you've taken all reasonable steps if you haven't done a risk assessment. Your training needs to be practical, scenario-led, and tailored for your organisation and really regular. And leadership and governors and trustees also need to be included that, so other stakeholders. And there needs to be really clear, trusted reporting channels. But really, leadership are also really key in ensuring that respect is in the air that everybody breathes. And again, I cover this in training. Schools that are genuinely reducing risk aren't doing more work, they're just doing smarter work. And they, so going back to, say, the risk assessment as well, is it updated as well when, for example, I don't know, you're 2Ping people in, for example, to run your cleaning operations, or maybe you just you've got a new cohort of employees from I don't know, from a different country, or was it updated when there was an incident or an issue with a third party? So these are all the questions that I ask. So this is the framework that I would like schools to work with, that my framework adheres to. So where risks are identified really early, who feeds into this, how often, are people in different areas of the school getting involved in this? Because one person doesn't hold all the knowledge. Who will see it? What actions will be taken? And who will own the organisation-wide risk assessment? How is this communicated, not just to staff, but to governors, trustees, visitors, agency workers, contractors? Do you have that tailored training to your industry, to your school? And is there additional training for those with management responsibility? And how often is it taken place? And what training do other stakeholders have, like governors or trustees? How do they know, and parents, how do they know the right questions to ask? And what other tools do you need to implement this properly? Do you need checklists? Do you need champions training? Have you got those trusted reporting routes? I would definitely recommend that every organisation has an anonymous reporting platform. And also, how do you listen? How can you evidence that you are listening to your staff voice? Do you do regular staff surveys, for example? And how do leaders own this whole process. So that it might feel that you've got so many priorities that it might feel safe to wait, but the evidence really does suggest the opposite. And when things do escalate, they escalate quickly, and so does the cost, in not only in leadership time, but in risk to tribunal and in reputation. So the key risks I've identified here is that it's a really wide duty. Someone could overhear something or see inappropriate behaviour, even if it's not directed at them, and that could give rise to a claim. People also don't have to complain for there to be a risk of claim. And similarly, people could even join in with the banter and then subsequently submit a claim. There's also a proactive responsibility to implement these measures rather than just responding only after. And the amount of leadership time that can get eroded. When I used to support schools with employee relations cases, you've only really got to get 1 or 2 cases for it to be really problematic, and for that to have a ripple effect throughout the whole school. There's also obviously the legal and financial risks. Non-compliance can lead to a tribunal claim. Potential compensation can increase of up to 25%. But this is the key thing here as well, is that sexual harassment, if it's connected to a protected characteristic, so sex, race, gender, maternity, status, marital status, all sorts, disability. If it's connected to any one of those, it is considered to be discrimination for which, and that immediately means that the sanction for them could exceed £100,000. I think the average case last year was around 350,000 of sexual harassment in schools, and that's if you get all the way to a tribunal, and they're usually scheduled for at least 3 days. That kind of case, I would imagine, would be scheduled for a lot longer. So you are looking at a lot of money and impact. In addition, more claims and inquiries via ACAS, which is the people you need to phone first to get a number to be able to take you to tribunal. They say that related claims have increased roughly between 39 and 57% from 2024 to 2025. So it is absolutely huge. And complaints can escalate externally, causing problems with unions. Ofsted, you really don't need that. So I hope I've persuaded you now that this will go up in your priority list. But why listen to me? I'm professionally qualified by the CIPD. I've worked in HR for 25 years. I've also got I'm an accredited mediator and peer mediation in schools, and it's what I do all day, every day, and my delivery style is really unique. So let's quickly go into what this all reasonable steps means. The technical guidance, as I referred to earlier on, explains this really well, and it talks about you do need a policy, obviously, to explain who is protected and how you'll deal with it, and provide examples of unacceptable behaviour and how you will deal with it. More importantly, how you engage with staff as well is really, really crucial. And you can do this via one-to-one staff surveys, do the risk assessment, and ensure your reporting systems are really up to date and you've got that centralised anonymous reporting system. train everyone and assess that effectiveness, and ensure that your managers or whoever it needs to be is really well trained in how to handle complaints, and proactively consider your third party, those risks, and what you're going to do, how you're going to communicate standards, and what actions as well you will take in the event of concerns, and how you're going to monitor and review it. And also how you're going to track the near misses as well, the minor stuff, because that should also really feed into your risk assessment. So the difference really is that at the moment, the phrase reasonable steps means that an employer must take proactive and proportionate action. The phrase all reasonable steps is a much higher legal threshold. It requires employers to demonstrate that they have taken every step that it would be reasonable to take in the circumstances, not merely some or most. So this is about adequacy, demands thoroughness and completeness. So I just want to quickly go through three different cases here. So one is Moonstar versus Five Ways Express. This was when a member of staff saw that people were downloading pornographic materials in the workplace. Now, they didn't share it with her, they didn't talk to her about it, they didn't circulate it. She didn't complain because she was worried about losing her job. But it was found to meet the legal definition of harassment. It created an intimidating and damaging sort of environment for her. It was unwanted and it was of a sexual nature. Another case, Hunter v. Liddell. This is where a woman was harassed and inappropriately touched by a manager and I think another male member of staff. And she asked to move and to a store with a female manager, and that didn't happen. The Beanie versus Highways England, if you're interested, do look it up, but it's more about how you can individually be, because the risk isn't just organisational, you can individually be named on tribunals and face yourself having to defend yourself at a tribunal. So the risk is wide. Just a few quotes here about the kind of feedback that I've had for the training that I've done. I really love this type of work. It really, I really enjoy being very creative with it, and I put together really engaging training tailored for specific clients. I've also put together a whole framework that supports all of this. So I look at the communication, the policy side of things, what tools would actually help in terms of meeting those Ofsted requirements. How do all stakeholders get up to speed? Obviously, the risk assessment side of things, how we report, and as well how we train and how do we test that knowledge. And soon there is coming a staff safeguarding platform with all of these materials in. You'll always get the most up-to-date information, and you'll get on-demand training, so you can capture all of those new starters when they start after you've done your inset days, and it will be tailored to your industry. And there will be additional training as well for your champions. Schools are much larger organisations, so, and there will be also cost savings and discounts based on your current services. So if you would like to go on the wait list just to hear a bit more about it, please do drop me an email. And finally, Thank you for attending today, and I would love to offer you a free where you're at review, and this includes a free 20-minute feedback session with me. Please do feel to join me again. I know I've thrown a lot at you on the 20th of April.